The Lord who has given light to this land says. The bald man spoke. As soon as he finished speaking, Enkrid tilted his head. I am a servant who worships the light. In other words, he was a priest who used the words of the Holy Scripture as a greeting.
What brings you here?
Enkrid asked. I have come to bestow blessings. The priest smiled warmly.
Blessings all of a sudden.
Enkrid pondered for a moment.
Aren't these kinds of blessings usually given before a war?
Regardless, the priest continued to speak. The hand of light that protects this land has sent a hero to this territory. Ha ha ha. For example, something like an oddly developed sense of smell aimed at Krona. It all blended together into a new sense called the sixth sense. This sense allowed one to grasp the disposition of the person in front of them, or rather, was it first that there seemed to be no intention of hiding anything from the opponent? The man, who had been babbling about the words of the Holy Scripture and whatnot, eventually boasted that it was his 3 days and nights of sleepless prayer that protected this territory. Rem adjusted his fur coat and looked up. What did he just say? The intent was clear in his expression.
Don't.
Enkrid intervened appropriately. Ragna, who was also ignoring it and heading to the quarters, stopped walking. It was evident that his weight had shifted to his left foot. He had activated his peculiar sharp senses. Enkrid raised his hand to show his palm to Ragna. It meant to stop. Rem might show a small sign before causing trouble, but Ragna would just start beating someone up if he got annoyed. Of course, the most dangerous one here would be Jackson. He might slit someone's throat before anyone noticed.
Everyone, stop.
Enkrid repeated. He could feel the irritation-based anger from them, and he was no different. But out of all of them, he was the only one thinking clearly. You couldn't just beat up or kill a priest in the middle of the territory, especially in the center of the barracks. Well, maybe a little beating wouldn't be too bad?
That's troublesome.
Even Kreis spoke in a cold tone. His comments seemed more about how to hide the body if they killed him. It wasn't because of Krona. Even if Kreis avoided the front line and disliked fighting, he was still a seasoned warrior. Because of that, if they won a battle because of someone's prayer, if that was the sole reason for victory, if surviving the battlefield was only due to prayer, what does that make those who bled to win? Enkrid concluded. This guy is an idiot. The first rule of dealing with idiots isn't to beat them, but to ignore them. Avoiding filth comes first, so ignoring was the answer. But usually in such situations, the one to quietly let it go stepped forward. The late afternoon sunlight cast a long shadow over the belly of the fat priest as he took a step.
Are you saying we won because of your prayers, and thus we should offer a victory donation?
He didn't use the term brother. Enkrid knew Auden. He was devoted to religion and used divine power, but it was also a secret, and he didn't beat just anyone. Moreover, whether the priest was corrupt, greedy for gold, or fond of women, Auden usually avoided trouble when it came to priests, so everyone just stared blankly. Yes, that's right. If you donate for the temple, for the territory, and for the people, I will spread the word widely. Enkrid understood what the other was implying. A few gold coins would make them sing their praises louder. But were these the kind of people who sought someone's praises? Ignoring him seemed like the best course of action.
If the will of the light is so lofty, what about the funerals for the dead?
Auden asked abruptly. Enkrid briefly considered whether he should stop Auden. That will be done in due course, the priest replied nonchalantly. His tone revealed how little he thought of the dead soldiers. This was a world teeming with monsters and beasts. Everyone lived with their necks under the threat of war. One never knew when monsters would burst forth from the demon realm, sparking another holy war. In the historical holy war, it was said that more than half of the human and allied races perished. Rivers of blood flowed, and mountains of corpses were formed. It was truly a world of terrible wars, and now? It was no different. The continent was still engulfed in turmoil, so one must ask, does having the threat of danger at their throats mean that lives, easily snuffed out and broken, are cheap and worthless? Some might agree. A warlord leading a nation might see his soldiers as mere numbers. Even a general might think that way, but should a priest also think like that? I heard you brought many good items. Haha, if you donate them for a good cause, blessings will follow. Moreover, this priest had not even a speck of holiness. The word blessing sounded more like extortion. Auden looked at the priest. This was a common occurrence. Idiots were as plentiful as grains of sand, and this territory seemed to have more than its fair share. Idiots addicted to drugs and hypnosis, idiots belonging to the Black Blade Bandits, and idiots disguised as priests.
A common occurrence.
Auden knew this was nothing special. Furthermore, what had he done when he encountered such people before? Even if the border guard had no clergy, wandering priests occasionally appeared. Had he not seen them committing robbery under the guise of collecting donations? Everyone ignored it. For a long time, the excommunicated clergyman who ignored all visible problems placed someone who breaks through barriers above him. Also, recently he saw a beast defying its fate. Among them, the human's name was Enkrid. The defiant words stood before the human named Enkrid. Many thoughts flashed through his mind. These thoughts concluded from what he felt while looking at Enkrid. Auden recognized his own transformation.
Did they tell me to just stand by and watch what's wrong?
No, his father, his god, his master did not command him to do so. Therefore, Auden responded and acted upon seeing the wrong. He could do so because his master, who now resided within him, had steadied him. This priest was an idiot. Enkrid knew it too. He was just about to ignore and overlook him. The moment the air was displaced and something triggered his sixth sense, Enkrid reacted. If Rem couldn't control himself and threw an axe, it would be chaos. He reached out, intending to block with his body, but it was a person who moved. The person slid under Enkrid's outstretched arm like a snake, swinging their hand. There was no groan, no death cry. The one who moved was Auden. He swung his open hand, and the priest's cheek caught the blow. Enkrid turned his body. During this, Auden's movements registered clearly in his senses, so he asked,
What was that?
The snake step.
Anyone watching would surely think this was a conversation between madmen. Having satisfied his curiosity, Enkrid looked at what Auden had done.
Is he dead?
Probably close to it.
Rem answered the question. Ragna, observing the situation quietly, looked at Auden and muttered a single word.
Troublemaker.
Jackson followed, speaking without expression.
Was that necessary?
Why not just slit his throat when no one's looking? Finally, Rem looked at the priest, who was sprawled on the ground, writhing a few steps away from where he had stood, and spoke. It didn't seem like he was dead, judging by the trembling of his limbs.
Man, people need to learn to have some self-control.
Rem muttered, You're one to talk. Enkrid thought as he signaled Kreis with his eyes, who approached to check the priest's breathing.
Fortunately, or maybe not so fortunately, he's still breathing.
His cheek was swelling red, but he was alive. It was a relief that his eyes hadn't popped out or burst. Now there was just the problem left to deal with. Enkrid was the company commander of this band of troublemakers. He was used to these kinds of incidents.
Well, this might be the first time we've beaten up a priest.
There was no temple in the border guard. It wasn't for any particular reason, just a series of coincidences. The first commander distanced himself from religion, and his successors followed his lead. The recent commander before Marcus also despised greedy pigs who coveted his position, so he hated corrupt priests. Whether they had a strong spirit of sacrifice or not, he disliked temples because they collected donations. The current battalion commander, Marcus, was the same. He believed in the gods and made donations, but he didn't allow temples to be established in his territory. He cut out anything that wasn't beneficial to the territory. He was curious why all the priests who visited the territory seemed to be interested only in Krona. If the temple actually sent someone, they could quickly establish a temple. But as of now, there was none in the border guard. Was it the first time they'd seen such an idiot? No, but it was curious why they'd beaten him up now. Enkrid looked at Auden with that intent, and Auden, clasping his hands together in prayer, spoke.
I have no regrets. I only followed the orders of my lord.
So you wanted to beat him up?
Enkrid understood completely.
Let's just kill him and bury him.
Rem suggested. It didn't make sense. There were already many eyes watching the commotion in front of the quarters. Instead of answering a pointless question, Enkrid examined the priest again. He was certainly not dead. As Enkrid crouched and inspected him, one of the watching soldiers spoke up.
Why do I feel so relieved exactly, stupid pig?
A few thoughtless soldiers chuckled, while the smarter ones called their commander. As soon as the commander heard what had happened, He reported it up the chain of command, and soon Zimmer appeared.
Let's say I did it.
Enkrid looked at Zimmer, who continued with a glint in his eye.
I think it'll be easier to deal with if it's me who did it.
Thanks, but
You are the heroes who protected this territory. Surely I can handle this much.
Zimmer puffed out his chest as he spoke. What happens when a priest gets beaten? He will report it to his superiors immediately. The temple would then send someone, either claiming that their god was disrespected or to establish their influence over the territory. If they knew that the border guard and Martai were transforming into a trading territory, the temple might try to establish themselves here and claim some of the byproducts separately. What would happen to Zimmer if he took the blame for beating the priest? He would face fines and penalties, maybe even suffer more severe consequences. If the temple decided to press the issue, he might be imprisoned. Beating a dispatched priest in the territory could mean that. But Zimmer would be better off than Auden. An external person beating the priest and a conflict with someone they already knew were different issues. The influence within the territory was also different. Enkrid scratched his forehead. He looked at Auden, who hid his divine powers. The most concerning issue was,
can we really tie that bear to the temple?
probably not. He hides his divine powers and stays in a territory without a temple. That means he's a fugitive. Enkrid understood this instinctively. It was an obvious problem without needing to ask, whether he believed in a heretical faith or committed a crime against the temple, or both.
Everyone here will be witnesses.
Zimmer spoke confidently. He was an Easterner and a commander in this territory. Influencing the divided soldiers wouldn't be difficult for him. Those from the border guard were already favorable to Enkrid, so they wouldn't need much convincing.
Let's do that.
Kreis said, nudging Enkrid in the ribs. Enkrid decided to accept Zimmer's offer.
Thank you.
Zimmer nodded. Just as he had stepped up to fight right after the defeat, he was a bold man.
That settles it then.
He had the fallen priest carried inside by the soldiers. The next day, the priest, having lost his memory, screamed and protested loudly. Zimmer exchanged a few words with him. Enkrid, who had been sweating all morning running through the barracks, happened to witness the scene by chance.
How dare you lay hands on a servant of God? Do you think this matter will be overlooked? The Radiance is watching. Huh? I will report this to the temple and thoroughly address this.
It was in the outskirts of the barracks, where the vegetation was dense. Fortunately, it seemed the priest didn't know that it was Auden who had beaten him. Later, after hearing more, Enkrid realized that Zimmer was even bolder and more forthright than he had initially thought.
One because of prayer. Hey, you damn pig!
The priest was stunned into silence. His tongue, which had smoothly accused the other, was now tied.
What did you just say?
A subtle tremor in his voice could be professionally described as being scared.
Damn, is there fat in your ears too? Should I cut those ears off halfway?
Zimmer drew his dagger with a sharp sound. It was morning, and the sunlight was bright. The dagger's blade beautifully reflected the light.
Or maybe the tongue that's spewing this nonsense.
He made a gesture, as if poking near the priest's mouth with the tip of the dagger. There's a certain presence that suggests they might actually do it if provoked. Zimmer had that presence now. The priest hesitated to speak, eventually attempting one last act of defiance.
I will inform the temple of this.
If you do, you'll either end up as a ghoul's meal during morning prayers or die valiantly in a charge in the Centaur colony battlefield. Ah, this could work. You got badly wounded during the charge, say, around here. Then you died because you couldn't be treated. Everyone would believe that a priest could have healed himself using divine power.
Not all priests could wield divine power, but it was a given that it was not something to boast about. The priest was struck speechless. It was truly a bold scene. It left a deep impression on Enkrid. Then again, if it was about threats, Enkrid could have handled it himself, right? But that wasn't the point. The threat from someone living in this territory couldn't be the same as one from an outsider. Zimmer made it possible. He was an interesting person, this Easterner named Zimmer. As Enkrid returned to the quarters, Kreis, wiping sleep from his eyes, spoke.
Come to think of it, they're quite kind.
Who?
Before the sweat he had shed could dry, Enkrid headed back out to train with his sword. He moved as he always did. Behind him, Kreis spoke.
The Black Blade Bandits.
How are they kind?
It's getting cold now. Can you take Rem's fur coat for me?
If you wear that fur, an axe blade will find its way to your neck.
Even if the commander tries to stop him.
Without a doubt.
Ah, damn it, I should have bought one too.
Even though he said that Kreis wouldn't buy a fur coat, he was incredibly stingy when it came to Krona.
Let's go out, you're gonna swing your sword, right?
Kreis said, looking outside. The sunlight was warm, but the air was cold. It was winter, and the temperature had dropped. Enkrid grabbed his sword and went out. He had to stay here until the day the dwarf had promised, so he planned to train as usual. Kreis stood by his side, sharing his thoughts. He spoke about why the idiots of the Black Blade bandits were kind. Enkrid listened, thinking that lately, or rather since coming to Martai, he had been encountering more idiots in such groups. Coincidentally, the Black Blade bandits had just started to draw their swords seriously now. There was also the priest who had been beaten by Audin, so how should they deal with these kinds of people? The answer was simple.
Just beat them all up.
There was a clear answer, but now it was Kreis's turn to figure out the way to achieve it. Enkrid had told him to do so, and Kreis was faithfully following that command. Kreis did as Enkrid instructed.
A way to deal with the Black Blade.
Wasn't that what he was told to find? Kreis pondered and racked his brain. It was a given that the Black Blade was up to something. So what would they do? No. Before that, how did he come to know they had such intentions? Simple. Because the enemy told them. Thus, they were kind.
Or they're just idiots.
He leaned towards thinking they were idiots, but that wasn't important.
Think about it, isn't it obvious?
What is?
These bastards, they kindly say they won't leave the commander alone, and after killing the guy who said that, they send another one.
Kreis said this as he walked into a patch of sunlight. Pulling his coat tighter to ward off the chilly morning air, Kreis continued speaking. Meanwhile, Enkrid was swinging his sword around. To Kreis's eyes it looked like stirring a stew with a ladle, literally just aimless swinging.
This time they kindly send someone who's not even part of their group and tell us not to kill him. Makes me think they're actually really gentle folks.
Thieves or idiots.
The enemy was indeed idiots, kind idiots at that. Despite this, Kreis continued to have ominous thoughts, because of his upbringing and inherent characteristics.
What if they send a knight?
Could they withstand a knight-level opponent? He saw Enkrid training. Behind him was the closed dormitory door, a stone wall made of pebbles and plaster, with a dull brown door in between. Inside, barbarians bundled up in heated stones and furs due to the cold, a brute who had beaten up a priest just yesterday out of spite, a troublesome human who wandered aimlessly despite being directionally challenged, a mood breaker who vanished at will, a half-blood giant ex-cultist, and an ex-thief beast-woman were all asleep.
Could they even handle a knight?
A flicker of hope briefly intruded into his ominous thoughts. Nonsense. A knight is a knight. They are monsters, disasters. Kreis shook his head.
So what's the plan?
Enkrid was now stepping and moving while swinging his sword side to side, attempting some maneuver. To Kreis's eyes, it looked like a dance while stirring a stew. Watching his commander absent-mindedly, Kreis once again let his ominous thoughts run rampant through his mind and spoke.
We have to do everything we can.
It was literal. The enemy kindly informed them of the impending attack.
If I were a thief.
If I were the leader of the Black Blade group trying to kill them.
The commander is a junior knight who has realized will.
And his subordinates are all monsters. The dwarf compares people to metals through insight. The fairy compares opponents to plants and animals with unique sensitivity, and Kreis saw his subordinates as gold coins.
How many coins?
Incalculable. He couldn't yet estimate their worth with his current abilities. From one perspective, they were just troublemakers, but from another,
An incomparable force.
viewed externally, they would undoubtedly be considered an overwhelming force. Kreis's rapidly turning mind calculated what the enemy, the Black Blade group, could do, might do, or would likely attempt, and he spoke it out loud.
Assassination, ambush, poison, bribery.
There were 4 main points. Enkrid was no fool. He stopped his sword for a moment. The next move didn't come seamlessly. He had just failed to mimic a snake step.
It's probably the way back that's the issue.
What's the plan?
Still the same question, Kreis made only one request.
If we request support from Company Commander Torres, or is he now Battalion Commander? Will Battalion Commander Torres lend us troops?
Probably.
There was no reason for him not to. The duration would be the issue. They couldn't leave the territory unattended for too long. There was no need for Enkrid to point out what Kreis already knew. Martai was also short on hands. That's why they were also progressing with the plan to hire mercenaries and privatize the forces. This time, they were going all out. They planned to spend the earned krona to sweep away the monsters and beasts around the grateful forest. Enkrid pondered during Martai's response, the fight with the colony and his training time. For the safety of the trade route, what could the border guard do?
If we expand the patrol area.
What immediately came to mind was something vague. It needed deeper thought.
Once we receive weapons from the dwarf, we'll head back, right?
As soon as we receive them.
If there were no problems, that's what they would do.
Understood.
With that, Kreis disappeared from the morning. Enkrid again had his own time. That is, time with his sword. At dawn, he had practiced the isolation technique with Audin. His words lingered in his heart.
If you have found the answer to why you train your body, the next question is, how, isn't it? I believe I have already given you that method, haven't I?
Audin was a good teacher. His words meant that Enkrid should think for himself. He said he had already laid the foundation. Enkrid was neither dull nor stupid. The only problem was that his body didn't always move as he wished. So now?
To move forward.
To face tomorrow. To be able to face it. That mindset remained unchanged. The only difference was that he felt twice as joyful as before. Even if it felt meaningless, it didn't matter. That was his way of thinking. That was Enkrid's meditation method, and that's what he did. He entered his own world. He submerged himself. He sank, observed, contemplated, and understood. He added thoughts to his previous realizations.
No one tells me what swordsmanship to learn.
Even Ragna, who taught him the middle sword technique, didn't particularly care if he used other swords. Just then, Ragna appeared and stood beside him, swinging the absurdly heavy sword made in the border guard's forge. There were no ingenious moves. He struck straight down from above. It seemed as if the sunlight was being sliced by his dull blade.
Cutting and cutting again.
Cut through anything that stands in the way. That is Ragna's sword, his swordsmanship, the essence of the middle sword technique. Enkrid reviewed what he had learned. The Valen mercenary sword technique is an illusion sword. The nameless swordsmanship is a correct sword. What he learned from Ragna is the middle sword. Later, he learned the basics of the fluid sword technique from Ragna and practiced it alone to some extent. He learned to flow and shake his sword by observing and realizing while facing the enemy.
No, I learned this from Audin as well.
Wolof-style martial arts. Martial arts, in the end, use hands, feet, and the body as weapons. They are the shortest weapons humans can use. So what is the foundation of martial arts? Flowing, fast, heavy, and light. Everything is mixed. It cannot be divided into correct, middle, slow, fast. Wolof-style martial arts encompass all techniques. It is an ideal form, but it is not swordsmanship. However, parts of it could be incorporated into his sword. While swinging in concentration, Enkrid reflected on what he had and focused on the fluid sword technique. Even when training his body, he emphasized flexibility. Lifting heavy stones or iron lumps was the same, but he also spent time meticulously loosening and stretching each muscle. These were to develop flexibility. Why the fluid sword technique? The reason was that he had properly opened his sixth sense.
The fluid sword technique is defense, a defensive style.
For that, the most important thing was the eyes. In other words, it's about senses. One must see and understand correctly to twist the contact point of force and let it flow. Seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, and feeling everything. The five senses are blurred and fused into one sense. If the previous sixth sense was merely a branch of a new sense, an extension of the five senses, now it was closer to a truly new sense. It wasn't called opening the third eye for nothing. Jackson sat on a round stone chair at one side, which was a large rock roughly carved into a chair stuck in the ground. It would be extremely cold to sit on in winter, but Jackson seemed unfazed. Why wouldn't he be? Jackson's own training was harsher and more grueling than this. Such cold didn't even register as cold to him. Jackson's eyes caught Enkrid's figure.
What?
What makes him move like that? It remained a question. But just as much as that question, there was now a reason to stay here.
It intertwines.
That commander had now become someone necessary for Jackson to achieve his goals.
Hey, Wildcat, what are you staring at so intently?
Rem the barbarian came outside, yawning widely. It was a pointless provocation. Jackson ignored it as usual. Rem's gaze turned to his commander.
Look at that.
The barbarian rarely showed surprise. Ragna and Audin were no different. Immersed in his own world, swinging his sword, they had all experienced that once, therefore, they could understand Enkrid's current state, engrossed and trapped in his own world. Was it dangerous? No, it was in fact an opportunity. A rare training opportunity in a lifetime, a chance to realize his limits and advance several steps forward.
Hey, Wildcat, we need to secure the area. You too, Navigator. Hey, Bear.
I understand, brother. Sister Teresa and Sister Dunbachel should join us too.
Audin spoke, and they moved quietly. Early on this unexpected winter morning, Enkrid's group formed a circle around their quarters. What they did was simple.
Do not approach. Do not make any loud noises.
It was a restriction. They turned away anyone who approached.
Hey, I heard you beat up a priest. I came to talk about that.
Even when the Lord came by.
That person was unworthy of being called a priest, Lord Brother. In any case, now is not a good time.
Some people found it incomprehensible. A few soldiers frowned, wondering what they were doing. Those who understood Enkrid's state quietly stepped back. More than half of Martai's barracks were Easterners. Easterners were known for being tenacious, tough, and loud.
If you make noise, I'll split your head open. Silence is golden. The Lord said, shout on the battlefield and speak softly at home. So please sew your lips shut and stay quiet. Quiet, or be cut. Do not cross this line.
They acted as usual. Dunbachel quietly watched Enkrid while moving her body. Impatience tormented her, so she had to train in any way she could. Teresa found the man strangely fascinating.
I am the wanderer Teresa.
After regaining her composure with her usual thoughts, what she saw was a man swinging his sword alone, grinning like a madman.
Does he find joy not just in battle but in training too?
Born and raised in the bosom of the cult, Teresa didn't know the world. Her world was narrow. Even now, she wasn't sure of the rightness or wrongness of her choices. Only one thing.
I want to fight.
She wanted to swing her sword at the man occupying the small training ground in front of the quarters. She wanted to split his skull. She also wanted to charge at him with her shield. She wanted to punch him and kick him. She wanted to fight. The desire boiled within her, making right and wrong irrelevant.
Calm yourself, sister. Control your heart.
It was Audin's constant advice. Teresa adjusted her mask and replied,
I am Teresa the Wanderer. I can endure.
Patience is a virtue. She wasn't born with such virtues, but now she aimed to keep and learn them. Only then could she fight him and experience the thrill of the moment. In his own world, Enkrid sometimes wandered, sometimes ran, and sometimes crawled. It didn't matter. He was contemplating swordsmanship. Occasionally, an apparition of a ferryman appeared and spoke. By now, seeing his face had fostered some familiarity. Seeing him so often did that.
Crazy fool, this isn't a wall I built.
What was he talking about? It was an illusion, a hallucination, so he ignored it. The ferryman wasn't important right now, nor was the repetitive nature of today. Correct, middle, fast, slow, light. Out of the 5 divided sword techniques, Enkrid had properly learned the correct and middle techniques. However, despite mastering them, they felt uncomfortable. It wasn't just that they were difficult, they never felt quite right. Why?
Clothes that don't fit my body.
A sword built on talent, led by talent, and stacked on the soil of talent. It was not the path of a dullard. He didn't realize all of this immediately. He was simply moving forward based on what he sensed in the realm of intuition and sixth sense. He continued to walk, crawl, and run. Just.
Where is my path?
He used brief questions to determine his direction. In this way, Enkrid moved beyond the basics of the fluid sword technique and sought a new path. It was a process of creating a new swordsmanship. Nothing happens all at once. When Enkrid emerged from his immersion, he only understood what he had done. He also knew that he still had to refine and internalize what he had achieved until today, and continue building upon it.
Swordsmanship.
Becoming a knight or creating a new swordsmanship might seem like madness, a false tale with no substance to others. But so what? When had anyone else's view ever mattered? As he emerged from his immersion, the sun was still high in the sky.
It was just a moment.
Enkrid thought this as he looked up and saw a dwarf girl pouting her lips in front of him.
Hey, I'm busy too.
And then the dwarf spoke.
Well, are you the only one who's busy?
Enkrid blinked twice as he stared at the dwarf. There was a discrepancy between the situation he perceived and the present reality. Enkrid checked the state of his body. He felt as hungry as if he hadn't eaten for days, and his muscles trembled as if they had been overworked. His vision was blurry, too. The problem with his eyesight was due to fatigue. Not just ordinary fatigue, but the kind that felt like he had been climbing a mountain for days without sleep or food. His body felt heavy. The extreme exhaustion made his entire body feel weak, to the point where he couldn't muster any strength in his hands. His body was trained to wield a sword for 2 days straight without sleep, so being in this state was inexplicable.
How long has it been?
Enkrid spoke as he clenched and unclenched his fist. The strain on his body was evident.
You're as shameless as in fairy.
The dwarf girl spoke with an incredulous smile. Enkrid didn't need to hear an answer from the dwarf. He could see Rem and Ragna behind her. Rem, who was picking his ear, spoke first.
It's been a little over 3 days. Are you thrilled?
Did you enjoy it?
This question came from Ragna, who was watching with his arms crossed. Without taking a breath, both of them asked, and Enkrid once again reflected on his state. So, what had happened? The time that had passed like a dream lingered in his mind. Every moment, every step was an enlightenment. At the end of those steps, Enkrid was absorbed and immersed. He achieved his goal and reached his destination.
I created a sword technique.
He had created one. Although he couldn't properly name it yet or define it clearly, what was certain was that he had created a fluid sword technique. Sword masters usually refine the techniques they've learned over their lifetime and pass them down. Even those with deep knowledge in swordsmanship only manage to refine it. Enkrid created one. His heart pounded with excitement. Despite the exhaustion, the thought of mastering and refining what he had created brought a smile of joy to his face.
Are you smiling? Have you lost your mind a bit?
I was planning to get treatment at the temple in the large territory anyway, dwarf girl.
As the dwarf girl twirled her finger by her ear, Rem spoke. Enkrid, filled with joy and excitement, didn't respond to Rem's words.
He seems absolutely thrilled.
Rem sneered as he watched, but even that didn't reach Enkrid's ears. And Ragna, who had been observing Enkrid, nodded alone.
It was good.
The dwarf girl was a wanderer who roamed the continent. She had seen the world for over 10 years. For her, this was a rare experience. Regardless of their talent and disposition, those like Enkrid were purely crazy. The dwarf had come the day before he woke up and had been kept away until then. After seeing him wake up, she had brought him over despite his constant complaints.
Then just leave the weapon here and go.
Even as she said this, the dwarf shook her head.
I have to see the faces of those who will use the weapons I made. That's my rule.
The dwarf girl had a strict rule of personally handing over and conversing with those she made weapons for. Dwarves sometimes adhered to their own rules almost obsessively, and this was one such rule. Despite complaining about wasting time, this was the reason she stayed. In any case, the dwarf's complaints soon subsided.
I see.
Enkrid ignored the fatigue and showed an attentive attitude as he listened to the dwarf. The rest of the company members either loitered around, didn't listen, preached about the gods, or outright ignored him. Kreis was the only one who could somewhat hold a conversation, but he was so busy that it was hard to see him. In such circumstances, Enkrid's attentive demeanor was enough to melt the dwarf girl's heart. From the beginning, Enkrid had the best attitude and mindset on the continent when it came to listening. This attitude quickly softened the dwarf's heart. It also helped that her personality was far from petty.
Well, it's a relief that you're mad in a good way.
The dwarf commented and handed over the weapons to Enkrid. The order was for 2 swords and 2 axes. They were well placed on a wide piece of leather. She picked up one and spoke.
To be honest, smithing isn't my specialty. My specialty lies elsewhere. But this is still better than what those amateurs make.
The dwarf, whose name was unknown, said, and Enkrid acknowledged her words. The dwarf handed over the weapon, which was sheathed in a leather scabbard. She handed it over with the handle forward, so he grabbed it. The weapon had considerable weight. The blade wasn't long, but it was thick. It was as thick as the guard sword he was using now. Its length was a bit longer than a short sword. It was a modified form of a gladius. When he drew the sword from its scabbard, the blade smoothly revealed itself. The silver body continued in a soft streamline.
It's well made.
Rem, who was watching, said, "That was exactly right. If it were a woman, it would be a beauty. If a man, a handsome one." It was similar yet different from the blades used by the ferry company commander. It had heft and looked sturdy at a glance.
Since you have a decent sword already, I thought this would be suitable as a secondary weapon.
The dwarf said, gesturing to the original sword at Enkrid's waist. She had made it on her own without being asked, but she was right. The original sword he had was also a fine blade. It was impressive that she recognized it without even seeing it. He wondered if that was just a dwarf thing, and soon his idle thoughts disappeared. Enkrid stood in the training ground without rest and swung the new sword a few times. What pleased him the most was the balance. It felt perfectly balanced about 2 fingers up from the hilt. It seemed like it would be an excellent weapon, even when thrown in the tangum style.
Throw it, slash with it, block and strike with it. I made it sturdy for any use.
The dwarf's explanation matched his impression. The feel of slashing and throwing both felt good in his hand. Especially the sharp tip and the long upper part of the blade made it look ideal for thrusting. Enkrid threw the sword up and caught it after it spun a few times. Indeed, the balance was excellent. He firmly grasped the hilt, swung it lightly in the air a few times, and his movements were noticeably smoother than before. His swordplay had gained a new fluidity after breaking out of his shell. Of course, few noticed this change. With the sword in hand, Enkrid nodded. It was a nod of satisfaction, and the dwarf who was watching was quietly impressed.
Look at this.
Someone had refined and polished this stone. It was a transformation. Could such changes happen in such a short time?
He's no ordinary talent.
The dwarf misunderstood. It was understandable. The truth was that countless efforts had accumulated, and it happened to coincide with the present by chance. From the dwarf's perspective, Enkrid was just a bundle of talent.
Aren't you going to give me mine?
Rem urged from behind, and the dwarf threw the axes. She threw both simultaneously, and Rem caught the handles of both axes perfectly. Naturally, the axes were excellent. Even Rem, with his bad temper, said,
Good thing I didn't turn that dwarf into a stuffed trophy back then.
which made the dwarf girl burst out laughing. What was so funny about that remark? It made one question the dwarf's mental state. Rem examined the 2 axes. He looked them over carefully, again and again. One of the axes had a sharp weight attached to the end, which could be used like a weapon that strikes with the handle. The other one was supposedly made by melting down the entire glaive used by a centaur leader, and using all that metal to forge the axe.
It's heavy, so I like it.
Rem's honest assessment. Naturally, everyone was satisfied. Lastly, Ragna, who received a sword, spoke to the dwarf.
It's good.
He received a northern-style Zweihander, a 2-handed sword wielded with both hands, with a blade thickness twice that of others, and a large pommel and handle.
I finished it in the northern style.
The dwarf said with a smile. Though she claimed not to be a master or a specialist in smithing, perhaps it was a characteristic of her race. She showed a satisfied smile as she saw the others content with the weapons.
All right, this wraps it up. If we get the chance, let's meet again.
The dwarf girl spoke cheerfully, then turned and looked at Kreis one last time. Kreis, who had come out at some point, was watching those who received weapons and was now staring blankly at the dwarf girl.
Hey, human kid!
Judging by appearances, she was the kid, but her manner of speaking and the title suited her well.
Yes?
If you become a gem later, I'll consider it.
Kreis, not understanding but nodding nonetheless, took it as a good sign that they would meet again. With that, the dwarf left. After the dwarf girl left, Enkrid became the center of attention.
Are you feeling better? What kind of person ignores meals and just swings a sword?
Kreis asked.
As you can see.
His muscles were strained, but he wasn't on the verge of collapsing. He was hungry, but not to the point of dying if he didn't eat immediately. Everyone in the company knew Enkrid had seized some opportunity to grow. However, no one brought it up directly. The only ones who spoke were Rem and Ragna when he first regained his senses. From what they heard, he had been so immersed that he couldn't see or hear anything around him, and they had taken turns guarding and driving away anyone who approached. Later, Torres said,
It was like trying to meet someone more elusive than the king.
So they said. Anyway, after the dwarf left, Enkrid slept for a whole day. He woke up, ate, and then went back to sleep. What he thought was a short nap turned out to be 3 days, during which he had been swinging his sword throughout the entire time of immersion, sometimes fast and strong, other times slow, like a turtle in the sea. However, there was no rest. Naturally, his muscles were strained, but wasn't his body trained with the isolation technique? After sleeping deeply for a day, he was fine. After waking up from his immersion, Enkrid rested, ate, slept, and sorted out his realizations. It wasn't until late afternoon the next day that he spoke.
Rem.
Rem was sitting in one corner of the quarters, stroking his axe. He had been bothering Dunbachel out of boredom for a few days. He was starting to feel bored.
I've been waiting.
Rem jumped up eagerly at the welcome call. He had applied oil to his axes, making them shine. It was time for a spar. The result was that Enkrid couldn't win. No, he lost more easily than before.
Again.
He repeatedly aimed his sword at the axe blades, trying the same technique several times, but never succeeded easily. A few times he half conceded, but it wasn't satisfactory, so he kept being pushed back. But what did it matter? More important than winning or losing the spar was getting accustomed to his newly created technique.
Good.
The sparring, which started before sunset, continued until they were drenched in sweat and ended after midnight. A maid heating bath water late at night complained, but fell silent upon seeing Enkrid's body. For some reason, Zimmer, who saw Ragna swinging his sword morning and evening, requested a spar. Audin spent more time praying and seemed to have a softer expression than before. Dunbachel, watching Enkrid, started imitating the isolation technique without anyone asking her to.
There are ways that suit your body. I'll teach you a few.
Seeing this, Audin offered help. Of course, Audin was helping, but Dunbachel seemed to be enduring torture. Teresa also silently worked up a sweat. She was busy honing her skills, swinging her shield and sword. The mere fact that Enkrid was in a state of immersion was another stimulus for them. The wild horse spent its time watching humans. The soldiers had left a haystack for it as food. Ordinary horses would relieve themselves anywhere, but this one was so clever that it dug a hole in the ground with its own hooves to do its business in a corner of the barracks. The sight of it digging with its hooves was peculiar. The stable master marveled at its strength.
Sigh, it would be perfect if I could just put a bridle on it.
This was said by the man responsible for Martai's warhorse. Cavalry horses are the backbone of the cavalry. He was a man who had raised such horses. He truly felt regretful but didn't try anything with the wild horse. Whenever anyone approached recklessly, it exuded a fierce aura. Enkrid watched the wild horse thoughtfully.
Should I give it a name?
It's not unusual behavior. There are plenty of strange people around. Adding one more horse wouldn't change much. At the border guard, there was even a wizard who could transform from a panther into a human. Enkrid decided to postpone naming the horse. For now, the wild horse seemed busy exploring everywhere. Everything around it probably piqued its curiosity. However, it never approached people. Soldiers who saw its unique blue and red eyes said they felt chills for no reason. It was due to the beast's innate ferocity. Time passed with what seemed like mad training and sparring. On the third day after the dwarf left, they also began to move. It was the moment when Kreis, who had been tirelessly exploring the territory's market and meeting with the Lord, said it was time to leave.
Let's go back!
It was time to return to their own territory. Enkrid led the way, and the Lord saw them off.
I wish you good fortune.
They departed at dawn, and by the time the sun rose, the territory was no longer visible behind them. Kreis guided the way. They left their horses behind and traveled on foot. Only the wild horse walked beside Enkrid.
Oh, it's snowing. Those demon bastards are at it again.
As they walked, white powder began to fall from above. The white flakes fell on the ground and on the armor of the party, melting upon contact. Fortunately, the wind didn't blow fiercely, nor did it snow heavily. The small white grains only slightly limited their visibility. The snow fell quietly and peacefully, not causing much discomfort. As they entered a path flanked by two mounds while walking through the snow, they encountered some people blocking their way. One of them was a familiar face.
Did they say idiots end up sticking together or not?
Rem spoke, looking at one of the people blocking their way. Although they wore a black robe to hide their appearance, the bulging belly and exposed mouth gave away who they were. The fallen priest snorted. Rem had mentioned it before setting off. They had encountered that fat fool at the market, and their gaze had seemed odd. Rem had also said that idiot might join hands with another idiot. This was the moment the prophecy came true. Of course, some schemes were employed to make the prophecy come true.
Call me Prophet Rem.
Though they had tripped and fallen, with an arrow whizzing overhead, Rem managed to act smugly. After all, Things had turned out as Rem had said. Enkrid called Rem as he wished.
Idiot Rem.
Is your hearing broken? I said the prophet.
Idiot and prophet are the same word.
Did you just make that up?
No.
Enkrid was confident and honest, while Rem, thinking, damn it, let's stop talking, gave up on the prophet title.
The world is full of confused and foolish people. It's our duty to send them to God, make them repent, and be reborn anew.
Audin recited a prayer. It sounded like he intended to kill them all. He always seemed to want to kill that fallen priest whenever he saw him. Enkrid took a step forward. He was the leader of this group. He placed his left hand on the pommel of the sword at his waist and stood with one leg bent. To an untrained eye, his stance seemed relaxed, but to those skilled in swordplay, it was a well-prepared posture. From the opposing side, a man stepped forward from behind the fat fallen priest. Overall, he appeared solid and unyielding.
The client asked one last question. Have you considered joining the Black Blade Bandits?
An attempt at persuasion in this situation? How naive. Crace inwardly snorted. He closely observed the man who had stepped forward. He was a head taller than the fat priest. Like Enkrid, he had stepped forward, indicating he was the leader. He had a fierce look in his eyes, a long sword, fierce eyes, an attitude that seemed indifferent, a mercenary known for planning his kills. Crace guessed his identity based on his appearance alone.
The ready sword?
Enkrid heard it too. He thought it might be a somewhat famous mercenary. He felt a flicker of interest. The relaxed arms, the slightly spread legs, eyes fixed on his own feet and legs. He also slightly adjusted his body to the optimal position for drawing his weapon. A skilled fighter, that was Enkrid's assessment.
Do you know me?
The mercenary asked. His voice was flat, making his tone sound rough.
I didn't know you had fallen enough to take a job from the Black Blade Bandits.
Crace feigned surprise. It wasn't a great provocation, but the mercenary frowned. He seemed offended.
You have a sharp tongue.
And you have this selling yourself for a few gold coins.
A mercenary with fierce eyes, tall stature, and a sword as big as himself. Commonly said to be stronger than a baronial-level knight, could even be considered a junior knight. He was especially famous for always being well-prepared in every fight. That's how he got his nickname. Crace taunted him. An enraged opponent is easier to deal with than a calm one. It was a simple strategy.
I told you, those idiots wouldn't think at all.
The fat priest babbled behind. Crace wanted the mercenary to get angry and charge, but it didn't go as expected. The ready sword simply raised his left hand. Then, heads began to appear from the hills on both sides. These were troops that had been lying in ambush for 2 days. Some were from the Black Blade Bandits, and the rest were the mercenaries' own men. The ready sword had heard a bit about his opponent. He had heard that Swift Blade had been defeated. Moreover, the ready sword thought of himself as different from idiots like Swift Blade. Relying on scrolls? Why do such idiotic things? Unless you're a knight, you can't survive a barrage of countless arrows. That's why he prepared 50 archers. The hills on both sides are steep. There might be some who can climb those hills. To block them, he positioned 2 heavily armed squads around the hills. To capture less than 10 people, they moved over 70 troops. Is that all? Including the ready sword himself, a formidable group of mercenaries stood solidly behind him. It was hard to get here undetected, but the actual fight would be easy. That's preparation. With his hand raised, the ready sword spoke.
Those who don't value their lives.
How long will they last against the Black Blade Bandits? A mercenary has to be smart and perceptive to survive long. He was such a person, and Crace, peeking from behind Enkrid, spoke.
Good thing. I wondered what we'd do if a bunch of wizards showed up, but it's sloppier than I thought. Didn't get paid much, huh?
Crace made a circle with his thumb and index finger as he spoke. Enkrid admired Crace for his sharp tongue. He knew how to provoke the enemy properly.
I'll personally skin that damn bastard alive,
the ready sword said. Crace widened his eyes in feigned fear and stuck out his tongue, replying.
Go ahead.
Sometimes childishness can be a fatal move. This was such a time.
That damn dog.
Crace had indeed driven the enemy commander mad.
Not bad.
It was a brilliant move. Enkrid was impressed, and even in that moment Crace kept thinking, spells always create variables, so he was cautious.
Well, no matter how powerful the Black Blade Bandits are, they wouldn't have dozens of wizards.
Seeing them use scrolls last time naturally led to such a disturbing thought. However, Kreis thought the enemy troops were too sloppy. Their quality was low, and their numbers were few.
Why?
The answer came with a question.
They don't know our true strength yet.
Enkrid and all the platoon members had fought well enough to spread their reputation. They performed well on the battlefield. They destroyed colonies.
But if this spreads by word of mouth...
That's how rumors are. They grow and get exaggerated. And fools who think they're smart would strategize based on the rumor's exaggeration. If it were Kreis, he would first madly verify the truth of the rumors as they spread. It was understandable for the Black Blade bandits to feel wronged. Trying to dominate the night streets of the border guard, they were met with the influence of the Gilpin Guild, and planting spies inside the fortress was difficult due to Marcus's remarkable skills. Contrary to his reputation as a war maniac, he meticulously controlled the interior. Since he arrived, there were even rumors among merchants that the border guard reserve unit's duty intensity had increased. Of course, this was also a misunderstanding. Enkrid's training was so grueling that those who found it unbearable dedicated themselves more diligently to their duties, spending as much time as possible at the gates or on patrols. In any case, the Black Blade bandits were unaware. They not only misjudged Enkrid and the others' abilities, but didn't even recognize Kreis's existence. On the other hand, Kreis recognized the enemy's stupidity, and in some ways, it was understandable.
Indeed. Where else would you find junior knight-level monsters gathered in such a group?
It's not like they were a knightly order. The lack of information was something Marcus had leveraged to gain significant advantages on the battlefield. Furthermore, there would have been repeated doubts about Enkrid's abilities afterward.
More importantly, the abilities of the platoon members wouldn't have been rumored at all.
One junior knight-level fighter, a group of archers, and other combat-capable mercenaries. While not all junior knight level, they were at least at the level of a baronial grade fighter. So, it wasn't really sloppy. The Black Blade bandits just didn't know about them.
Maybe I over-prepared a bit,
Kreis thought, snapping his fingers. Naturally, nothing happened. There was no way a finger snap would be heard beyond the hills.
What?
Ragna, watching from the side, asked.
Do you need to go to the temple too?
Rem asked. Kreis cleared his throat and said,
The timing was a bit off.
Kreis felt no embarrassment. He spoke confidently, and right after he finished speaking, the top of the hill became noisy.
What the hell? It's an ambush!
It was the cry of the ambushed enemy troops. Some archers turned around. It was already too late to perform a coordinated volley from above. Some of the armed soldiers next to the archers turned immediately. They then charged at those who had flanked them from behind.
How dare you?
One of the enemy soldiers bravely stepped forward and swung his sword. He was a mercenary wielding a bastard sword. Gripping the sword with both hands, he swung it down. His skill wasn't bad. The person facing him was unarmed. He ran forward as if to meet the incoming sword, entering the enemy's range. Thud, stab! There were sounds. The mercenary swinging the bastard sword fell forward, and the man who had been in his range pushed him aside and emerged. Torres wiped the blood from the drawn dagger on the clothes of the man he had just killed. A thin leather armor over a gambeson bore the insignia of the border guard.
Oh, we're not late.
On the opposite side, a man swiftly moved among the enemy soldiers. With a swift movement, he drew his sword and thrust it in. His speed was like lightning. The distance closed rapidly, and the drawn sword pierced so quickly that by the time it was visible, one enemy soldier already had a hole in his neck.
Gah!
One of the mercenaries staggered, clutching his neck before falling to his knees. Red blood poured through his fingers. With a pierced neck, there was no hope for survival. Zimmer stopped, having displayed his specialty.
Idiotic thieves.
He spoke, and his face was fully visible on the not-so-high hill.
Looks like it's over?
Kruss muttered irritatingly. For a mere band of thieves, hastily assembling such a force was impressive. It showed the resources of the Black Blade bandits, especially since they weren't just any ragtag group. They had even hired a junior knight-level mercenary. This wasn't a trivial matter. While there's a gap between an actual knight and a junior knight level, how many of such skilled individuals could there be? In the north, they were likely very few. However, the enemy knew far too little about their opponents. Well, it's hard to believe until you see it for yourself. Kreis thought so.
It's a bit disappointing.
Enkrid muttered. Kreis ignored him. He often had ominous thoughts and prepared accordingly. That's why they were prepared. The border guard and Martai's army began occupying the area near where they had ambushed. The archers of the ready sword, caught from behind, fell into a state of panic.
Damn, attacked from behind? Then what about the front? Is there an escape route?
There was none. From the initial positioning, everything was anticipated and predicted. Torres, flanking the archers, inwardly admired Kreis's intellect.
The Big Eyes isn't ordinary either.
The measures the ready sword had prepared on the hill were exhausted. Those who took the hill were the elite of the elite, the slaughterers of the frontier, overshadowed by the presence of Enkrid. The ready sword's face remained expressionless. Instead, the faces of the mercenaries holding out behind him changed in real time.
Damn it!
Some felt anxiety.
Screw it! If we kill them, it's over!
Some felt a fighting spirit.
Shouldn't we be retreating?
Someone spoke up with a practical alternative.
So who's the idiot now?
Kreis asked, and a deep crease formed on the forehead of the expressionless ready sword.
We should have resolved this with force from the beginning.
A large man stepped forward beside the ready sword. Looking behind him, there were about 20 men, none of them lacking in skill. Of course, that's compared to regular soldiers.
Only those who are confident should come at me. I'll kill them all.
The iron mace in each hand of the man who charged forward was quite threatening. If they could seize the victory on this side before the battle on the hill began, it would be over. Despite his dull appearance, he was a sharp mercenary. Wandering the battlefield for a long time, he had likely developed a keen sense for these situations.
I also agree with him.
Next to him was a woman licking her lips. Her tongue was so long it seemed it could reach her chin. Not just her tongue, but her face was also unnaturally long vertically, giving her a bizarre appearance. She held 3 throwing knives in each hand. They were imitations of the whistling knife. Rem growled as he watched them approach.
I'll go first. Just try stepping forward and I'll chop the back of your head with an axe.
Enkrid, about to step forward, let him go ahead. A change in perception and insight, a new evolution of the 6th sense beyond the 5 senses. With the help of all that, Enkrid momentarily played the fool. In other words, he predicted the future. Among the ones charging, none could withstand Rem's axe. This was a conversation they had before leaving Martai.
We need to deceive and hit.
Whether it was the Black Blade or the priest, Kreis had a firm belief in how to deal with idiots. Enkrid agreed with him.
Let's do that, yes.
With a cheerful response, Big Eyes prepared a lot. The result was this.
Quick, kill them all.
The fat priest, who had secretly passed on the movements of Enkrid's party, shouted, "Where did that fat priest get information about Enkrid's group?"
He was indeed foolish.
The priest trusted a street kid who sold him information for a few coins. Too easily, far too easily. Afterwards, Kreis also anticipated an attack from the Black Blade. Specifically, they chose locations along their route that were good for ambushes and surprise attacks, and roughly gauged a cloudy day by looking at the sky. It was good if it snowed, but a heavily overcast day would do. Through several incidents, they made it so that the Black Blade group would find it easy to attack.
They seemed quite foolish.
Kreis doubted whether the Black Blade group was really a formidable band of bandits. Do such guys really do this? Send a few mercenaries and hope this party dies? Of course, this was due to a lack of information. It's not like the Swift Blades survived to pass on any information, and it was hard to gauge the strength of Enkrid's party based on rumors alone, especially when it came to understanding the skills of those under Enkrid's command. Kreis saw Rem lightly kicking the ground and moving forward. Then Rem disappeared. The ground he kicked split and cried out. At the same time, a line was left behind, and that line severed the neck of a thug wielding a mace.
Damn, it cuts well.
Then came Rem's voice. Kreis couldn't see all of the barbarian's movements, but he could infer everything from the result. His excellent brain made this possible.
The mace was coming down from above, and before it could land, he severed the neck with an axe.
This happened because his hands and feet were several times faster than the swinging mace. He said the axe blade was sharp because it split the mercenary's helmet in half, the one that covered his face. The blood of the mercenary wielding the mace splattered across the thin layer of white snow. The white snow began to melt in the red blood. Fresh snow started falling over it again. Enkrid observed the battlefield. Kreis inferred the process from the result, but Enkrid saw everything.
Don't surrender.
Rem was enthusiastically charging, with Dunbachel and Teresa moving alongside him. One of the mercenaries, apparently familiar with Dunbachel, greeted her warmly.
You treacherous bitch, traitor.
He shouted this as he thrust a long spear at Dunbachel. His skill didn't seem bad. At least it was better than Dunbachel's previous level, but that was all. Dunbachel was no longer that foolish beast. Her body seemed to twist and bend. For a moment, it left afterimages as if she had multiplied into 3. This was possible due to her excellent physical abilities. It was an afterimage created by short, rapid side-to-side movements. At the same time, her scimitar was drawn, cutting through the falling snow and air, reaching the enemy's head. Every moment appeared fragmented and severed in Enkrid's eyes, thanks to his keen senses. The scimitar smashed through the head and came out.
Sorry, I didn't hear you. What did you say?
Dunbachel answered only after killing him.
She's becoming more like Rem.
Enkrid was worried about it but left it alone. After all, she was someone finding her own path, even if it was like that. Enkrid couldn't bring himself to criticize her for it. While he stood with his arms crossed watching, a few more mercenaries charged, and Teresa engaged 2 of them.
Damn it, where did this monster come from?
The opposing mercenary shouted. She was a tall, female mercenary who had been throwing daggers. Teresa blocked all her daggers with her shield. One of them seemed to be enchanted or something, changing direction mid-air, but Teresa deflected even that with her shoulder guard by twisting her body. Using her armor to defend was truly Teresa's specialty. Moreover, pressing with her shield and bashing opponents with a thick-bladed sword was another specialty, and she did just that. The female mercenary, who had survived until now by throwing daggers, had her head smashed by the flat of Teresa's sword, causing brain matter and blood to flow from the crushed skull inside her helmet. A clear liquid mixed with blood as her squashed eyeball burst and leaked out.
I am Teresa the Wanderer. Come at me if you want to die.
She spoke. The sight of a few bodies freezing in place at her short statement was visible. No matter how experienced they were, feeling fear in the face of overwhelming violence was only natural. The mercenaries quickly started dying. It was about time for a fight to start up above as well, but they saw their leaders being slaughtered. Naturally, their will to fight vanished.
Hey, surrender. There's a shortage of manpower in the territory these days. If you prove your identity and serve diligently, you'll regain your status within 2 years.
Torres coaxed them. After all, they were mercenaries who moved for gold. If they had decided to clean up monsters and beasts, taking these guys as prisoners and using them as meat shields would be beneficial. They could sort out the decent ones and accept them. It was a quick calculation that led to the proposal. I surrender. A soldier, lowering his wooden longbow, said. In the end, none of the soldiers ambushed on the hill fired an arrow. Seeing the mercenaries being slaughtered, the fat priest immediately ran away. He moved his legs as desperately as he ever had in his life. It was amazing how fast his fat body could move. A thick arm blocked his path. The startled priest fell on his butt. The impact from his rear end shook his head. He propped himself up on the ground and looked up. A soldier with the bulk of a bear was blocking his way.
This guy.
Zimmer had hit him, but he had his own people in the territory. They had told him the truth. The one who had originally hit him was this guy. However, with Zimmer glaring and threatening, he couldn't do anything that resembled a threat to these people. That had frustrated him. Afterwards, those he thought were his people encouraged him. Of course, it was all orchestrated by Kreis. From the start, they hired a few ruffians who lived off scraps around the idiot priest, a person whose character couldn't even be discussed. It was a ploy to lure the fat priest here. Why? For one reason, it was much better to deal with the threat than to leave it be. It didn't matter how corrupt the priest was. The problem was his status as a priest. The best option was to kill and bury him, so they deliberately brought him inside. If the best way to deal with an idiot is to ignore them, the second best is to bury them. So, from the moment Audin slapped him, Kreis had envisioned this very situation. Moreover, the Black Blade and the greedy priest were quite the fitting pair. It was somewhat unexpected how easily things had gone according to plan. Their opponents were too foolish.
The Master of Radiance says that revealing and illuminating is the task. Have you done so?
Auden asked. The fat priest answered without hesitation.
Of course, yes, yes, yes.
His voice shook and his tongue twisted, filled with fear.
You were supposed to illuminate the world, not just Krona.
Auden murmured. The priest tried to say that he had always helped underprivileged children and raised orphans in the temple. But Auden already knew through Kreis. This priest had illuminated Krona and also indulged in women. He had taken some of the orphaned girls as his lovers. Auden raised his palm and struck down. The blow to the top of the priest's head caused his eyes and tongue to bulge forward. Blood poured from every orifice, including his ears. Auden hated those who used their faith in the divine as an excuse for their vile deeds. There were those he hadn't punished before, out of doubt. He had turned away from them.
No longer can I know I will not.
With someone overcoming their own limits by his side, he too could no longer turn away from truth, life, conviction, faith, and belief.
I will live, Father.
I will not give up the life the Lord has granted me. I will kill the enemies under the Lord's permission and live that way. And so I will punish those who have broken my faith. It's not an easy task, and if things go wrong, it might end in a pointless death. But he will not die in vain. Every day is a day of learning. Apart from teachings, Auden learned as well. From Enkrid, from Kreis.
Seeing the light you have shown, I too will shine my light.
Odin prayed to his commander even though no one was listening. It was a prayer not to God, but to a human. It felt awkward, yet natural. Enkrid watched and let go of his hand.
Crazy bastards.
And he cursed inwardly. Shouldn't they leave at least one opponent for him to deal with? What's got them so excited? Even Auden, after breaking the priest's head, looked at him. There was a burning desire in his eyes, a gaze full of fervent fire.
A bear driven mad with the desire to fight.
Because the meaning didn't clearly reach him from a distance, Enkrid misunderstood. Rem, needless to say, was rampaging. Ragna wasn't idle either. Normally a spectator, Ragna suddenly stepped up and began swinging his sword. That strike was more impressive than ever before, a sword descending diagonally from above. It resembled an eagle diving towards its prey. It was, of course, faster than an eagle, but the image evoked was that of a raptor, and just as it struck downwards, it soared back up. The spot where Ragna's sword had moved left the man who was preparing his sword in 3 pieces scattered on the ground. Ragna looked at his sword right after swinging it, uncharacteristically impressed. Oh, it was a sword that pleased him more than he had expected. Truly the craftsmanship of the dwarves. Enkrid also wanted to use his newly developed sword technique in actual combat and to test the sword he had received from the dwarf, but
it ended quickly.
As Kreis's somewhat hollow words suggested, it ended very quickly. Rem had already cut down 5 or 6, and the flames hadn't even ignited on his flaming axe. There was such a vast difference between the two groups. In reality, Kreis, who specialized in ominous imaginations, had overprepared. Even if there had been archers, the outcome of this fight was already decided. During the killing and dying process, Jackson also stepped forward and captured a mercenary. He was a young man with a handsome face. He was also someone with a known name.
I'll do anything if you spare me.
The man said, his thigh bleeding profusely, as he made some proposal to Jackson, though Enkrid didn't know what it was.
I'll take this one.
It was rare for Jackson to make a request. Enkrid owed him a lot.
Take him.
He didn't ask or inquire about the purpose. To be honest, no one cared. Dunbachel clearly felt the change in her abilities. Teresa said,
Let's have a match when we get back.
She looked at Enkrid with an intense gaze, her blood boiling.
Sure.
It was a welcome request, so Enkrid nodded and looked around at everyone, thinking to himself.
Crazy bastards.
He resented them for not leaving any opponent for him. The first assault and ambush by the Black Blade ended in vain. Kreis blamed it all on their enemies.
They were too kind.
Of course, from now on, they would surely do things far from kindness. If even one of those plans hit the mark, someone's life would be in danger. Kreis's ominous thoughts spread wildly, and he thought of countermeasures. What else could he do? It was an unavoidable issue as long as he went to battle and followed Enkrid. At the same time, Kreis made up his mind.
I can't afford to make a losing deal.
His goal remained the same, the salon of the noblewoman. Even if it was a short-term contract, bringing Enkrid to the salon at least once, hosting him as a guest, the thought of it alone was exciting. The group cleaned up the traces of the battle. Torres and Zimmer, who had previously greeted them, came back to meet the group again.
Good job,
Enkrid said, and Torres nodded.
Take care.
The snow soon stopped, and the group walked diligently. As they stood in front of the border guard, a wild horse nudged Enkrid's shoulder.
Why? Oh, are you just looking around?
Sure, do as you please. It's dangerous to come to the territory on your own, so come when you're called later. Go ahead, look around and have fun.
Enkrid kept muttering to the horse. Watching this, Rem murmured.
I still think that thing can turn into a human. Let's have Esther ask it.
No one answered. After entering the border guard, the group headed straight for the barracks. It was already late afternoon. Since they decided to walk in and rest instead of camping out for another night, they arrived late. Naturally, there was no fuss at the castle gate.
I will keep moving back.
A soldier, familiar from training, opened a small gate. They were not entirely pleased to see Enkrid. Since the training they had been missing would resume, their faces were gloomy.
I'll check tomorrow morning to see if you haven't been slacking off.
Enkrid, as someone belonging to the unit, fulfilled his duties. Thus, he did not forget his role as the training company commander.
Yes, sir.
The soldier would be sure to spread this joyful and exciting news to everyone. His face reflected an overwhelming joy that was hard to contain. His cheeks trembled slightly, as if the joy was too much to bear.
I'm tired, let's rest a bit!
Kreis said as he headed into the barracks, while Teresa continued to look at him with fiery eyes.
How about we spar and then wash up?
Enkrid suggested. Teresa nodded. They sparred, and although Teresa lost, she was satisfied. He was a man worth following because he provided this level of challenge. There was also an inexplicable sense of satisfaction whenever she fought with him. The next morning, after a brief report to the battalion commander, Esther had fallen asleep in his arms the night before. The panther in human form had nothing to say and slept quietly.
Let's begin training.
He started the day as the training company commander and had lunch later.
A guy named Gilpin is here to see us. He seemed urgent.
Enkrid tilted his head. Was there any reason for Gilpin to visit at this hour? As soon as he heard this, he recalled a past incident. It was when a certain frog had come to see him. When he went to meet this friend named Gilpin, he also saw the ferry company commander standing beside him.
Wherever you go, fiancé, without even saying hello?
The company commander asked.